Hello, my name is Alok Debnath, and I'm going to be presenting a critical analysis of empathetic dialogues as a corpus for empathetic engagement, uh, submitted by myself and Professor Robert Gondlin as a position paper for Empathic this year. I'm going to be talking about what empathy is in dialogue and how it relates to emotion. And we're talking about the empathetic dialogues dataset, which is a benchmark dataset that captures empathetic engagement and has become the forerunner in corpora for this task. I'm going to critically analyze the corpus based on participants, dialogue lengths, ratios of speakers, and other statistics, and contrast them with other contemporary small talk corpora. I will then provide some insight into why this research is worth pursuing and what it means for the future of empathy research in AI. Let's get started. Empathy is a complex topic that comes from several different fields, including cognitive and behavioral psychology, with several overlapping definitions between 8 and 42, depending on the literature review that is seen and the lens and perspective that is looked at. In artificial intelligence, we focus on three main aspects: perception, understanding, and appropriate response. Perception in dialogue becomes emotion recognition. Perspective taking becomes the contextualization of those emotions within the context of the conversation, and emotion contagion is the appropriate and representative response to the recognized and contextualized emotion. Dialogue systems are a very common part of artificial intelligence today. Sorry. We focus on corpora that are used to fine-tune dialogue systems rather than ones that are used to train them from scratch. We only deal with unimodal text dialogue and not with speech-based systems. And the main questions that we ask are: how is empathy captured in the empathetic dialogues dataset, and how does that make it different from other small talk corpora? Empathetic Dialogues is a corpus published by Rashkin et al. 2019. It is a 25,000 dialogue dataset annotated with 32 emotion labels with an average of 4.3 turns per dialogue. We'll come back to the comparison statistics in a little bit, but let's talk about the dataset development process. First, emotion labels are extracted from a coalition of research that has occurred in artificial empathy and emotion recognition in humans over the last decade. We find that there are no research that uses 32 emotion labels. Most of them use less or far lesser, most popularly Ekman 6, and there is no real evidence of 32 emotion labels being distinguishable by humans in a dialogue context. This is not this problem sort of persists when we look at the next step, which is emotional situation generation, which wherein annotators write up situations that are strongly associated with those emotion labels. However, there is no inter-annotator agreement across this for verifying this strong association. Finally, annotators are provided with the situation, but not the emotion label that the situation comes from, and are asked to have a conversation about the same. Note that while it is an explicit requirement that the emotion label not be recognized in almost 11 to 15% of the conversations, either a similar word to the emotion label or the same emotion label word was directly used in the first line of the conversation. Um, Also, the length of the dialogue isn't long enough to actually account for change in emotional cues based on the responses, rather focuses only on the emotion relegated to a specific situation. And this is also seen in the way that that the data set and the model trained on that is evaluated. A critical comparison of empathetic dialogues with two other contemporary corpora: DailyDialog, which is a corpus of natural interactions from English learners from forum posts, and Persona Chat, which is an artificial synthesized dialogue dataset that is based on finding out more about the conversation participants while maintaining a consistent persona for the conversational agent. We find that while empathetic dialogues is the largest of the data sets, it is by far the smallest, like it has the lowest average number of turns per dialogue, almost half the other two corpora, which means that on average, a conversation is only 4 exchanges long. This is also important to keep in mind, considering that the ratio of sentences between the first and second participant, the person who initiates the conversation and responds to it, is 1.69, which means that across four turns, almost twice the number of sentences are spoken by the person initiating the conversation than the person responding to it. This is not surprising because the role of the person initiating the conversation is to talk about both the situation and how they feel about it, while the responder is only dealt with the exposition aspect of this. Note that because there is no dialogue to any other analysis of the conversational data set, it is hard to establish whether it successfully captures an empathetic response or not, which is an important aspect. Since it is not possible to determine whether a response was empathetic or not, nor is there a way to verify that both the participants are talking about the same situation and responding to the same emotions, nor is there an establishment of whether agents should respond with human-like empathy anyway. The development of a data set of this sort raises important questions of what empathy is. Empathy is not a characteristic of dialogue. Emotion is a latent characteristic of dialogue, as it can be recognized based on the context in which a certain thing is said, and certain phrases trigger certain emotions and can be annotated as such. However, empathy is based on recognizing those emotional cues and responding to them in context. So it is explicitly not a textual or paratextual phenomenon. It is a phenomenon of the interaction itself of the dialogue. And because of that, because it is hard to establish whether a response is empathetic, or more specifically, when a response is unempathetic, so so much so that in responses in daily dialogue and persona chat are probably more empathetic than in the empathetic dialogues data set. There's no real way to compare, primarily because daily dialogue is natural interactions, and persona chat is interactions based on trying to get to know another conversation participant, which auxiliarily requires empathy as a phenomenon. This raises what we have called in the paper the incidental empathy hypothesis, the idea that human conversation captures empathy such that small talk corpora based on those natural human interactions are just as empathetic as other small talk corpora. In conclusion, empathetic dialogues or other dialogue data sets that aim to capture empathy first must convincingly define that it is a characteristic of dialogue to be captured to begin with. It is really hard to define, and therefore separating the difference between the recognized emotion of a situation and how it is responded to is important. Developing a data set that identifies the principal definition and uses that as a part of the dataset construction without skewing the dataset construction in a manner that only looks at one aspect of empathy and not all of it would be the right way to go. But before we can do that, the first step is to answer the question, how do we tell whether a conversation is empathetic or not? More specifically, how do I tell whether a response given by an agent or a user is empathetic or not? And in order to do that, a system or metric that evaluates that response is important. Thank you all so much for watching. If you're going to be at Kai this year and you have any questions about this presentation, I'd be more than happy to meet you there and talk about it. If not, thank you so much for watching.